Hi everyone and welcome to 3 Tips to Optimize Your VPS. I am Ryan Gray. I'm the founder and CEO at NameHero, and we're doing this video in partnership with Liquid Web. Liquid Web's been a long-time partner here at NameHero, and I've personally used Liquid Web for going on 2 decades now. So the purpose of this video is to give you 3 quick and easy tips to optimize your VPS for performance. One thing we found here at NameHero as well as with Liquid Web, a lot of customers will sign up and they get their VPS and they know that they've made an upgrade from your typical shared hosting where you have multiple sites on a server, but there's still a little confusion on what exactly do I need to do with my VPS to make things run fast. And so in this video, I'm going to highlight 3 different methods that I like to personally use, like the first thing I do when I deploy a new VPS. If you do want to follow along on this and you decide to do this on your server, I do want to give you a warning that while these are 3 quick, simple, easy tips to implement, I always recommend scheduling a maintenance window to let your visitors, employees, team members know that you're going to be doing some work on the server and there might be a disruption. There's always a chance when you're carrying out these type of tasks that something could go amiss. So you definitely want to plan this. I also recommend doing it in the evening or nighttime hours or even on the weekend when things are not as busy, in case you have to have an issue and you have to do some work or invoke support onto an issue that you're not actually having downtime to your websites. I like to do this when I first deploy my VPS for that reason, but sometimes you have to do it on a live server, so make sure you plan accordingly. And also, while these are safe and relatively safe commands to be running, you always want to make sure you know what you're doing and understand what you're doing specifically if you do have a live server with live site on it. Okay, so let's talk about these tips here. There's 3 basic optimizations that I like to look at. The first one is the Apache MPM. What type of worker is Apache currently using and which one would be better. So I'm going to go into what is an Apache MPM and then go into my suggestion. We're going to talk about the PHP handler. So the PHP handler actually controls PHP and how it serves dynamic content on your VPS. I'm going to show you which one I recommend as well as switching to the different one that I recommend and what works best for you, as well as how to increase your INODB buffer pool for either MySQL or Mariah database. So either one of those engines uses the INODB buffer pool, but it can substantially increase your performance. So I'm going to briefly talk about each one of them, and then I'm going to show you on a live server how to carry out these optimizations. So first off, let's talk about the Apache MPM. Apache MPM, or Multi-Processing Module, it's an architecture in which Apache server uses that determines how to handle concurrent client requests. So if you have a website and a web server running, this is what handles those requests that come into your website. It also handles how the network communicates with the clients and how children processes are dispatched. So as you can see, choosing the right one ensures optimal performance, because if you don't have the multi-threaded option, you could run into issues. They're designed for different use cases, so not always what works for one works for all. So I'm going to give you my suggestion, but again, if you have something very specific on your server that requires your development team, make sure you do check with them before making these type of changes. I'm not going to read all of this on the slide. Feel free to pause if you want to read up more about Apache MPM. You can also check, there's tons of articles on Google as well as Stack Overflow, whatnot, on which ones for what different applications. I'm going to PHP handler. So PHP handler, this determines how the web server actually processes a PHP request. For this specific video, I'm talking about Apache. You can also use in Web Host Manager Nginx now. It does plug in directly as a reverse proxy, but today we're not going to get into using Nginx. Maybe we'll save that for another video. But the different type of PHP handler you use can make a substantial difference. So you've got the PHP FPM, Fast Process Manager. You have SU PHP. You have all different kinds of ones. So again, this might not be in your case. You might decide, well, no, Ryan, we're using this type of PHP handler and we cannot change it. That's fine. This is just a suggestion, especially when working with systems that have constraints on memory specifically. So I'll go into one which I recommend using, and again, test, see what's best for you, and feel free to make modifications as you see fit best for your environment. Finally, we're going to talk about the INODB buffer pool. As mentioned, this is what handles the caching engine for MySQL or Mariah database, and how big that caching pool is because that prevents, when someone goes to your website, you're pulling data from MySQL, having to read the disk for each piece of data that comes in there. Instead, you can cache that in the buffer pool, and then that data is going to come a lot faster to your traffic. And this can have a substantial difference in how fast your website or also your VPS performs. But if you're working with a limited amount of memory, you also have to be very careful that you don't set this too high. You can go as high as 80% as the system has amount of RAM. But it's important to look at, if you're running a database server, if you're running a web server, if you're running a DNS server, if you're running a mail server, all on the same VPS, you want to be really careful that you're not going to run into memory problems. So you can go as high as 80%. In today's video, we're going to take it as high as 80%, but that might be a little bit too high depending on your specific workload. So again, any questions, make sure that you reach out to someone familiar with your architecture, that you're not overloading to where you can actually, cause an issue to where your VPS goes offline. All right, so that kind of highlights what we're going to talk about. I'm going to change my screen over here. Let's exit out of this slideshow, and I'm going to go over to a live VPS right here. So I'm in Web Host Manager, and again, these optimizations can be done on a VPS that does not use Web Host Manager or cPanel, but the purpose of this video is to demonstrate how easily this can be accomplished in Web Host Manager. So if you don't have Web Host Manager, you won't be able to follow along as well with these steps. However, these optimizations are not dependent specifically upon Web Host Manager. Just to show you a little example here is I've got a GT metrics with kind of the before and after with these changes on this specific VPS. You can see we're about at a performance grade of B, 91%, about at 1.6 seconds. After these changes are made, you can see we went up to an A in performance, 96%, in 1.2 seconds. Now again, this is not an exhaustive list. I can get this site a lot faster by actually adding caching on the WordPress instance. This website here has WordPress. But it just shows you kind of what you can look at. As a disclaimer too, GT Metrics is a great tool to kind of point you in the right direction, but depending on like your intrusion detection system, what kind of firewall you're using, this sometimes can be treated as a DDoS attack. So I always tell customers, specifically when they ask, why did my GT Metrics score not improve? Like, well, did you, make sure your intrusion detection system didn't throttle those requests, or you whitelisted the IPs for GT Metrics? So again, it's a nice tool to have in your toolkit to, kind of point you in that right direction, but it's not always the end-all, be-all. But you can see in this report, I did gain, pretty substantial performance benefits, even though we are talking like about 0.4 of a second by doing these. But again, this isn't always the best measure because of those things I mentioned. Okay, so we're going to go back into Web Host Manager, and let's first talk about that MPM, that Apache MPM. So first thing I want to do is want to look at, what am I currently using, because that's going to make some changes here as we switch this stuff over. So if we go to Easy Apache 4, so let's type in Easy, good Easy Apache 4, and we can look at what we are currently using. Right here is our currently installed packages. So I'm going to click Customize. And you can see I'm currently using Prefork. Now, me personally, I would like to see either Worker or Event, because these are threaded multi-worker modules for Apache. And I do think Worker nowadays is the default that comes packaged in cPanel, but I have seen other settings, put out there. So I do prefer the Worker. That is what I suggest using. And I'm going to go ahead and change that. Now, if you already have Prefork set, you also want to make sure the other modules you have aren't going to conflict. And I'll show you once I select this. So before I change my PHP handler, I want to do this kind of in a two-phase thing. I want to change the NPM first and then go back and change my PHP handler. Because the way Easy Apache 4 works, especially with Web Host Manager and cPanel, sometimes that Apache config file doesn't write correctly if you do everything at once. So I am going to select Worker because I do want to use it because it is a threaded versus using a Prefork multiprocessing module. So I want to select that. Now it's going to show me my conflicts. So it says it's going to conflict with Prefork, obviously, as well as CGI here. So it's going to add CGID, and it's going to add the Worker here. So if if this is going to do a breaking change, make sure you are familiar with what's moving or what's going to get depreciated out of this with this change. I am good with this. It's a basic WordPress install. So I'm going to go to Next. Now I can add any other modules, but I like to just keep things simple. So I'm gonna go right and we'll skip to review and make sure it's gonna give me kind of a list like, hey, here's what you're adding, here's what's upgrading, nothing on this one, and also here's what's gonna be actually uninstalled. And I'm good with those. So I'm gonna provision it. And this doesn't take long to run. It's a lot faster than it used to be several years ago. But it does take a little bit depending on how fast those repos are connected to your server. But you can see we're good. Everything exited cleanly. I'm going to go ahead and click Done. Okay, so now we've got, we are now using NPM Worker. If I click Customize Now, you'll see that's going to be selected on here. See, I've got NPM Worker. We're all good. I want to look at, first off, where I switch the PHP handler, like what am I using currently? So if I go to PHP, you'll see here under Multi-PHP Manager, if I click that, you can see on this example VPS, I'm using PHP FPM. This is default nowadays by cPanel. If you're running a newer version of cPanel, you should see this NPM is enabled. PHP FPM, historically, it does perform very, very well. Now, I like to tell customers, especially when they come to me and ask, what PHP handler. FPM's fantastic, but it does use a lot of memory. If your system has under 8 gigs of RAM, 6 gigs of RAM, I like to use the LS PHP handler. And it's built by Lightspeed, and it's in conjunction, I think, too, with Cloud Linux. So if you go over to Cloud Linux's website, you can read about mod LS API, which is set to improve the performance of PHP. And I won't spend too much time reading all this stuff, but it kind of tells you, what the benefits are. Mod LS API, it's a very lightweight PHP handler. It has all these benefits that it drops in and it replaces, like issue PHP. Keeps things safe, but it also doesn't have the memory footprint that you have with PHP FPM. And this is why I always tell our customers, if you don't have a lot of memory on your system, I would prefer you go with the Mod LS API. Lightspeed, they operate their own web server as well. But this is a 100% free PHP handler you can add in, so you get like a benefit of Lightspeed web server without having to go get the license and all that stuff and actually replace your web server. So it drops right in on top of your existing stack, and again, there's no cost to you. And you can add in Cloud Linux later on, which also has extreme benefits. But this specific PHP handler, again, free of charge, easy to drop in, and that's what we're going to do. Feel free to Google this Cloud Linux page here if you want to read all these benefits. Since I am using PHP FPM currently, I will disable that, but I'm going to wait till I add that LS PHP handler. So I'm going to go back to my Easy Apache right here. And going to bring us back up. I want to customize my existing stack here. All right, we're not going to change the Apache MPM because we already did that. So now we're going to go to modules and we're going to search for LS. You can see here it is, mod_LS API. We're going to turn that on, and then I always like to do the HTTP2 mod 2. So it's going to make sure the requests are HTTP2, not HTTP1. That's not installed currently. You're going to want to install that too. All right, so I want to do those two. I can go to next now. PHP versions, I'm not going to change these. I'm going to keep the same versions of PHP. If I wanted to add another, I could here. But again, don't like to throw too much at once. Same with extensions. If I want to add an extra PHP extension, it's done here. But again, I made 2 big changes here, so I'm just going to skip right down to review. It's going to pull everything in just like it did when I changed the Apache MPM. It's going to say I'm adding the HTTP2 as well as the LS API, and none of this is affected. So I'm going to click Provision. And just like before, it takes a second to pull those repos, download those to your VPS, and then get those installed for you. Certainly a lot faster than it used to be decades ago, back in Apache 3. All right, everything's finished. It's clean and done. Okay. So now once this is done, the PHP handler has been added to the system, but you actually have to go select it. So I'm going to go back to PHP. We'll go back to Multi-PHP Manager. I'm going to scroll down here. Okay, so now I want to disable PHP FPM. Again, I like PHP FPM, but on systems with not a lot of memory, you can run into issues, especially with performance, because it has a higher memory footprint. So I'm going to disable it by clicking this. When I do that, I can then select my LS API PHP handler, And I've got 3 versions of PHP. I'm going to select it for all of them. All right. So now at this point in time, my website is going to use the LS API PHP handler. PHP FPM has been disabled, and also we did enable HTTP2 processing as well. It's always good, as you're making these changes, to go check your website to make sure things are loading as intended. So I've got my digitalizer.com demo domain, and you can see it's loading just fine, and we're off to the races. I can refresh it a little bit, make sure, kind of click around here, make sure I didn't break anything. And you can also, do that after each change you make, because if something goes wrong, then you can revert it and you know exactly what you did. Okay, I've made my first 2 optimizations now. My final one is that INODB buffer pool. I'm going to go over here to my command line. Let's go to my terminal. And first things first, I need to know how much memory I'm dealing with. So if I type in free-m, you can see I've got 3915 of RAM. So that's 3.9 gigs of RAM on the system. I've got 2.6 available after all cPanel and stuff is using. So I've got quite a bit. A lot of this is cached too. So what I can do is go into my MySQL config file. Now this is going to be in /etc/my.cnf on a normal install. If you've customized MySQL, this might be at a different location, but this is the default. And I just want to add this one line. So depending on your MySQL configuration, you might already have a buffer pool size. Now, as you saw, I've got about 4 gigs of RAM. Going up to 3 gigs, that's a full 80% of my system memory. That might be a little too high, depending on what you have available on your VPS. Mine just has 1 site going, as you saw in the previous command, not using, hardly any. So I'm going to go all the way up to my 80% threshold. If I wanted to go lower, I could go to 1 gig and kind of see the performance, kind of see how things go for a day, and make sure I'm not getting into out of memory problems. If I was, then I'd want to reduce that. So all you have to do is add this line, and I had it just commented out in here to save time in this video. But you just want to add this line right here, INODB_buffer_pool_size equals, and then I type in 3G for 3 gigs. Okay, with that commented out, I'm going to save it. So I exit, save yes, and then I need to restart MySQL or Mariah database. So I'm going to go to the service. I'm using Mariah on this one, and I type in restart. All right, and it started up just fine. I can check that by running a status command, and you can see I have in fact changed that. To confirm it, I can, all right, I'm going to go to phpMyAdmin. You go to phpMyAdmin here, and if you go under variables, you can then search INODB, and you can go down to buffer pool size, and you'll see it here. Buffer pool size right here, and you can see it got about 3.2 gigs in my buffer pool. So that change did take effect, and if I go to my site, you can see it is loading just fine. Always do check that I'm not getting a MySQL connection error. So I've now made the changes, and you can see it was relatively painless. Didn't run into any unforeseen issues. Site's running nice. I can continue to check. If I want to use Web Host Manager here, I can go to service status, and I can keep check on my services here, on my memory. Am I running into any memory issues? Am I starting to swap? And you can see I'm only using 30% still yet. I'm not doing hardly any swapping. It says Apache HTTPD is pending. That's because I did restart that service. So that should come back up here in the next 15 minutes once check serve has time to get that check complete and make sure it's all good. So that's how it's done. Again, these are 3 relatively safe, easy commands to run and check regardless of your skill level. If you have any questions, feel free. If you're hosting at NameHero, let us know. If you're hosting at Liquid Web, feel free to let their support team know. Either or is very good at answering those questions as well as helping you troubleshoot any issues. But I do hope to see you gain performance benefits from this. And again, I'm not going to say this is the end-all be-all because it never is. Everything's dependent on what type of application you're running, how much data is in your database, how many database calls your website's making. But these are 3 general performance optimizations that you will see time to first byte decrease, and also website load time increase or make better. It will decrease, load faster by making these changes. But it does depend a lot on your website and the specifics. But these are 3 I always recommend to customers when they're having issues with performance with their VPS. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Look forward to doing further collaboration here with Liquid Web. Once again, I am Ryan. I'm the founder and CEO at NameHero.com.